So just for lease review. So the documents you need to get are the lease, amendments to the lease, subleases, rental abatements, licenses, insurance, permits, development approvals of tenant's business, the car parking arrangements, bank guarantees, personal guarantees, lease securities, the list of the owner's fixtures and fittings being sold, evidence of payment from the vendor for any tenant's fixtures. So they have to prove that they actually paid, which we mentioned before, a list of what fittings they own, a depreciation schedule, any undocumented incentives. Then you've got you got to go over the lease details of start date, end date, renewal, whether it's personal name or company who's signing the lease. Then there's rent review. So look at the rent reviews. Ratchet clause, that's another one we didn't look at. So sometimes there's a clause saying you can't actually put the rent down. It's locked in. It can only go up. Security. So find out about the security, who owns what, how much they value, and you've got to verify all them. Then there's a whole checklist about fit out and make good clauses. Then you need to get the insurances. So what the insurance they're kind of putting up for like public liability or public indemnity. Then you got to get all the outgoings to cross check with the lease as well, because you're not just checking the rent that they're getting. You're checking that like the council rates, the water rates, the maintenance are also being paid. Then there's assignment and subleasing. So like my cafe, for instance, they sold the business to another one. So there's like a sublease. So you've got like the previous owner banking it, but then the new one, how they fit into it.
All right.
The tax part, so making sure they're paying GST component of the rent. Then the special conditions. So nominated car parks, document incentives are the ones I went through before. So there's quite a lot and this is just the lease review. So this is where the work comes in. And you'll see, Jared, with the property we're looking for you, like when we give you like the 80-page due diligence report, you'll go, geez, there's a lot here. Is this actually a good property?
Yeah.
And the hard thing is, and this sort of goes back to your question, there's no such thing as a perfect property. Like whenever I actually find one with zero issues, I'm always like, what have I missed? There's something I've had to have missed here. This is too good to be true. Normally what happens is the other way. I actually think I'm buying a mediocre property and I actually find something that the agent's actually missed. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, this has just turned into a cracker of a deal now. I'm not going to tell the agent.
Yeah. Yeah. And you get the deal for the same price the agent wants it without seeing, say, maybe a value add or something in the lease agreement that you have learned about that they don't know.
As simple as the rent being wrong. They've said the rent and the rent's actually like 20% higher and they've actually been paying that. But because the owner hasn't told them that correctly, they've given them the wrong number. They probably looked at the lease or something like that and used the wrong date. And in those cases, definitely don't tell the agent. They've just missed the mark with it. Yeah.
That's huge. So, the property is obviously returning a higher yield than what they're selling it for. That's awesome. On the other, so that's really that's their huge benefits, right? That you are finding out through due diligence, through so many deals that you've looked at. Have you heard, what is maybe like one or two horror stories that you've heard of people that haven't used a buyer's agent, go and buy a property with and not foreseen some things in the lease agreement that really hurt them?
Yeah, so I sort of alluded to it before. I've had once where like a medical tenant and a cafe tenant, actually it wasn't a cafe, it was a restaurant, it was a Thai restaurant. The tenant wanted to leave and then just took all the stuff and they didn't actually care and they just disappeared. The Thai restaurant, we believe they went back overseas. So they actually didn't care about like the bond and that. They just they must have sold all the equipment. And then the owner's just sitting there being like, I've got this empty shell now with no guarantees. And retailers generally have a longer lease period. And then the other one was the medical one where they wanted to take all the machines and fit outs and things like that and break the lease because them moving on was actually more valuable. But they paid a premium for it. So they're probably the two that I don't have that many horror stories from clients, obviously, because we do all this work. So it's normally people. I'd say the biggest one I see is people missing the mark and just buying something silly that they didn't really understand. So I spoke previously at a medical conference and one of them there bought a big Centrelink freestanding building that looked all attractive, had a 5-year lease, but it was so one-dimensional. When they left, all the value they put into was the tenant, thinking there's no way a Centrelink's going to leave. And then they left. So they paid 20-30% too much for the property. Then they're just left with a kind of an awkward office building in a high vacancy rate area. So that was more they're trying to get rich quick. And this is the same thing with Resi. People chase yield. They're like, I'm going to chase yield. And they just take on risks that they shouldn't be taking on.
Yeah. Yeah. So they obviously didn't see if there was a guarantee from Centrelink or anything like that. And they just have an empty vacant
No,
property?
so they Centrelink were pretty good because government tenant. It was just when the lease finished, like they didn't assess the risk of the tenant leaving. Actually, no. Here's one I personally had as well. So we bought a property that was a nail salon. This is early on in my first commercial investing. Everything stacked up. Nail salon was there. We inspected the property. It's all going kind of well. They were on a long lease. They didn't have strong guarantees. They only had a bond. And then our client bought the property. This is on the Northern Beaches. And then literally 2 weeks later, the property manager's like, I can't get a hold of them. Like I've called, like, because they inspected the property prior to going, called, and then actually went to the shop to go talk to them. Shop completely empty. They've just completely cleaned up and left. And they've obviously been in cahoots with the owner of the property. So part of our due diligence, like we try to find if there's some relation.